You have been lied to about happiness your entire life. Not by bad people. Not by people who wanted to hurt you. By everyone who wanted the best for you. Your parents, your teachers, the culture you grew up inside. The stories you were handed before you were old enough to question whether they were true. They all told you the same thing, in different words, with different details, but always the same essential promise, that happiness is the natural outcome of a life well lived. That if you make the right choices, build the right things, become the right person, the feeling will come, and it will stay. Now ask yourself something honestly. When was the last time you felt genuinely, completely okay? Not because something good happened, not because a problem was solved or a goal was reached, but simply because you existed. When was the last time the ordinary fact of being alive felt like enough, without needing anything added to it to justify the feeling? Most people, if they sit with that question long enough, realize they cannot remember, or they remember a moment so brief and so unexpected that it barely registered before it was gone. A morning before the day started, a specific quality of light through a window, a conversation that didn't go anywhere but felt, in the moment, like exactly what it needed to be. And then it passed, and the wanting resumed. This is not a personal failure. This is not a sign that you are broken or ungrateful, or that you have been living wrong. This is the gap between what you were promised existence would feel like and what it actually feels like from the inside. And it is the most important gap in human life, because almost everything we do is organized around either closing it, denying it, or finding a story that explains why it doesn't matter. Albert Camus was the philosopher who refused all three, who looked directly at the gap, named it with precision, and spent his short life arguing that living honestly within it, not closing it, not explaining it away, not performing contentment until a performance becomes the thing itself, was the only form of genuine human dignity available to us. He called the gap the absurd, and what he said about it is still, 80 years later, the most honest and most livable thing anyone has said about why human beings suffer the way they do, and what to do about it that doesn't require lying to yourself. Camus grew up poor in Algeria in the early 20th century. His father died in the First World War before Camus was a year old. His mother was partially deaf, barely literate, and spoke almost not at all. They shared a 2-room apartment with his grandmother and uncle. 4 adults and a child in a space designed for one. He contracted tuberculosis at 17. He watched his country occupied by a foreign power. He lived inside conditions that most people in comfortable circumstances use as hypotheticals when they want to test whether life is worth living. He did not conclude that it wasn't, but he was honest about the terms. His honesty led him, early, to a question that most people with more comfortable lives manage to avoid. The question of why. Not why his circumstances were hard. Why anything? Why get up? Why continue? Why any of it, given that the world provides no coherent answer to the question of what it is all for? Why the effort, given that every effort ends, every achievement fades, every relationship is temporary, and the universe, if you ask it directly, if you stand in front of it and demand an explanation, says nothing. In 1942, in occupied Paris, Camus published a short essay called The Myth of Sisyphus. Its opening sentence is one of the most honest in the history of philosophy. There is but one truly serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. He was not recommending it. He was insisting on taking it seriously, on recognizing that the question of whether life is worth living is the real question underneath every other question, and that a philosophy which cannot face it directly is a philosophy that is protecting itself from its own conclusions. His answer, developed across the essay with the precision of someone who has followed the argument without flinching, was a kind of yes. But the yes was not simple. It was not the yes of someone who had found a reason. It was the yes of someone who had understood that reasons, in the ordinary sense, are not what the question requires. To understand what he meant, you need to understand what he called the absurd. The absurd, in Camus's precise definition, is not a property of the world. It is not a property of you. It is the relationship between the two, the confrontation between what human consciousness requires and what the world provides. Here is what human consciousness requires. It requires meaning. It requires that suffering be for something. It requires that the arc of a life bend toward some point of arrival, some coherence, some answer to the question of why this particular collection of experiences, losses, efforts, and moments adds up to something rather than nothing. You are a creature who needs meaning the way you need oxygen, not occasionally, not when things get difficult, but structurally, at the level of how consciousness itself operates. You cannot look at your own life without asking what it is for. You cannot experience loss without asking why. You cannot lie awake at 3 in the morning without the question surfacing, in one form or another, with one level of urgency or another. And here is what the world provides in response to that need: silence. Not hostile silence. Not the silence of something that has considered your question and decided not to answer. The silence of something that was never configured to receive the question in the first place. The stars do not explain themselves. The history of human suffering, the full, unedited version, not the version that has been organized into narratives of progress or redemption, offers no coherent arc toward justice. The people you love die, often before their time, often in ways that serve no purpose and illuminate nothing. The universe was not designed with your need for coherence as one of its parameters. It simply does not speak that language. This gap between the question you cannot stop asking and the silence that answers it is the absurd. It is permanent. It is structural. It cannot be closed by becoming smarter or more spiritual or more grateful or more disciplined. It is not a problem that will be solved when you figure out the right approach to living. It is the condition of being a conscious creature in a universe that is not conscious in return. And Camus' entire philosophy is built on a single refusal. The refusal to pretend the gap isn't there. When the gap becomes impossible to ignore, when the feeling of arrival fails to arrive one too many times, when the story you were living inside stops holding together under examination, most people reach for one of two exits. The first exit is collapse. The logic runs like this: if nothing has inherent meaning, then nothing is worth anything. If the universe is indifferent to my suffering, then my suffering is pointless. If there is no answer to the question of why, then there is no reason to continue. This is the road to despair, and it is a road that feels, in the moments when the gap is most visible, like the only intellectually honest conclusion. Camus understood this road from the inside. He had traveled enough of it to know where it ended, and why it was a wrong turn. Not because it was too dark, but because it was too simple. It takes the silence of the universe as a verdict on the value of human experience. It confuses the absence of inherent meaning with the absence of meaning altogether. The second exit is the leap. The decision to resolve the tension not by following it to its conclusion, but by asserting, through an act of will or faith, that the tension is temporary, that there is a God, a plan, a transcendent order in which the suffering makes sense, in which the losses are balanced, in which the question is eventually answered from a position of sufficient altitude to make the answer satisfying. Camus had genuine respect for the religious impulse. He understood what it was reaching toward and why, but he could not follow it himself. Because the leap requires trading clarity for comfort. It requires deciding, in advance of the evidence, that the silence is not really silence, that it is merely the absence of the frequency required to hear the answer. And that decision, however sincerely made, is a decision to stop looking honestly at what is actually there. Both exits have the same structure. They are both ways of ending the confrontation, of resolving the tension between the question and the silence by eliminating one of the two terms. Collapse eliminates the question by eliminating the questioner. The leap eliminates the silence by asserting against the evidence that it contains an answer. What Camus proposed instead was to stay inside the confrontation, to refuse both exits, to look at the gap, understand it fully, and choose to remain in it. Not as a temporary position while you figure out something better, but as the permanent, conscious, chosen stance of a human being who has understood their situation and decided to inhabit it without evasion. He called this revolt, not anger, not protest, the permanent, interior, unflinching refusal to accept that the absence of inherent meaning is the final word on a human life. In the final movement of the myth of Sisyphus, Camus turns to a figure from Greek mythology that has been waiting, patiently, through the entire preceding argument. Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to roll an enormous boulder up a steep hill for eternity. Every time he reaches the summit, the boulder rolls back to the bottom, and Sisyphus descends to begin again. The punishment was designed to be the worst possible fate. Not death, not physical pain, but meaningless repetition. Effort that produces nothing lasting. Work that advances nothing. A perfect image of futility. Of a life that goes nowhere and adds up to nothing. Camus looks at this image and sees something the gods did not intend. He sees your life, the project that gets completed and is immediately replaced by another project, the relationship that requires sustained effort and never arrives at permanent comfort, the achievement that produces a brief interval of satisfaction before the next insufficiency makes itself felt. The morning alarm, the coffee, the commute, the work, the return, the sleep, the repetition, the boulder, the hill, the descent, the beginning again. You already know this rhythm. You have been living it. The question, Camus's question, the only serious one, is what you do with the knowing. His answer is the most unexpected sentence in his philosophy. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, not resigned, not enduring, not making the best of an irredeemable situation through sheer force of will. Happy, in a specific, limited, wholly real sense. The happiness of someone who sees their situation completely and continues anyway. Who knows the boulder will roll back and pushes it regardless. Who understands, in the descent from the summit to the base, that this moment, this specific, conscious, undeceived awareness of exactly what is happening, is something the gods did not calculate for when they designed the punishment. The gods gave Sisyphus eyes that see and a mind that understands. They gave him consciousness, and consciousness, fully inhabited, turns out to be the one thing the punishment cannot reach. The boulder can be taken away at the summit. The awareness that knows the boulder will be taken away and pushes it anyway is beyond the punishment's jurisdiction. This is the revolt. This is what Camus means when he says that one must imagine Sisyphus happy, not that the situation is good, not that the repetition is secretly meaningful, but that a consciousness that sees its situation completely, that does not flinch from the absurd, that does not collapse into despair or leap into false comfort, is, in that very seeing, something the indifferent universe cannot diminish. It is the only form of freedom available within a condition that cannot be changed. And it is, Camus insists, real. What does this look like when you are not Sisyphus, but simply a person who woke up this morning with the usual list of things to do and the usual low-level sense that none of it quite justifies the effort it requires? It looks like getting up without requiring the day to justify itself in advance. Doing the work, without needing it to contribute to some larger purpose that will eventually make the contribution feel worthwhile. Being present in the conversation you are having right now, rather than calculating whether it is moving you towards some future state in which you will finally be okay. It looks like what happens when you stop waiting. Most of the distance between where we are and where we feel we should be is created by the waiting. The constant low-level orientation toward a future condition in which the present difficulties will have resolved themselves into something manageable, and the permanent dissatisfaction will have finally been addressed by whatever we are currently working toward. The waiting is so pervasive and so habitual that most people do not experience it as waiting. They experience it as living. They do not notice the specific texture of the present moment because the present moment is always, in this orientation, merely the antechamber to the future state in which real life will begin. Camus' revolt is the decision to stop waiting, not because the future is unimportant, because the present, attended to with full consciousness, is not the antechamber to anything. It is the only room there is. It looks like caring about the people around you, not because the caring is guaranteed to produce good outcomes, or because it is moving you toward a relationship that will finally satisfy the need for connection, but because caring is what a consciousness in full contact with another consciousness naturally does when it is not busy protecting itself from the risk that the caring might not be returned. It looks like the specific quality of attention that becomes possible when you have genuinely stopped requiring existence to be other than it is, not the forced acceptance of someone performing contentment, the actual lived experience of a consciousness that has set down the demand and discovered in the setting down that what remains, the afternoon light, the conversation, the work, the specific texture of this particular life, is more than enough to be fully alive in. There is a moment that Camus describes in his private notebooks, not in the published philosophy, just in the private record of a particular afternoon in Algiers, where he is sitting in a cafe watching ordinary people live their ordinary lives, and he feels, very briefly and without warning, that everything is exactly as it should be. Not because it is good in any transcendent sense, not because the suffering has been explained or the questions have been answered, simply because it is there, because he is there within it, because the afternoon light and the sound of the city and the faces of strangers going about their business constitute something that is, taken entirely as itself without anything added, sufficient. He did not theorize the feeling. He recorded it and moved on. But that moment, that ordinary afternoon in a cafe in Algiers, experienced by a man who had grown up in poverty, watched his country occupied, thought seriously about despair, and looked honestly at the silence of the universe, is the emotional center of everything he wrote. The thing that the philosophy of the absurd is trying to describe and can only partially reach. The moment in which consciousness, stripped of its requirements and its waiting and its demand for something more than what is actually present, discovers that what is actually present is enough. Not forever. Not as a permanent state you can hold on to and carry with you through everything that follows. For an afternoon, in a cafe, in the light. That is what Camus offers. Not an answer to the question of meaning, not a solution to the absurd. The recognition that the question, honestly inhabited rather than escaped, opens onto something that functions better than any answer. The specific, irreplaceable, fully conscious experience of being exactly here. The boulder will roll back down. You already know this. The project will end and be replaced. The feeling of arrival will dissolve the morning after it arrives. The gap will remain. Go anyway. Not because it leads somewhere, because the going, done with full awareness of what it is and what it is not, is the only form of happiness that does not require the world to be something it has never been and will never be. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Now imagine yourself,